underway. We're seated at the discussion tables, so I appreciate all the guests that we have here tonight. We're going to start this work session off with public comment. We have a few people who have signed up for public comment, so if you are one of those people, please come up to this table and tell us what you've got to say, and please try to keep your comments to 3 minutes. We don't have the buzzer, but we still have our same protocols. So I don't have a list of who it is. Carrie? Here we go. I'm on this. All right. So we have Tom Desjardins and Ilona Wilson. Please come on up. Okay. All right. Oh, good.
All right, not that short. All right, thank you. Superintendent Guerrero, members of the Board of Education, my name is Tom Desjardins, and I'm the Executive Director of Mount Scott Learning Center, which is one of the district's contracted community organizations referred to as CBOs. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight on behalf of all the CBOs, which annually serve more than 1,600 PPS students that had previously dropped out or were on the verge of dropping out. Let me start by thanking all of you for your commitment to providing options for PPS students. Thank you for recognizing that different students have different needs, and that not every path to graduation looks the same. Thank you for allowing the CBOs to successfully serve and bring hope to hundreds of these students each year. We also appreciate your efforts and those of many others in the community in advocating for the CBOs and our student investment account funding proposal submitted last December. And we're pleased the district is including the CBOs in its student investment account application. However, we are disappointed the district is recommending an allocation of only 40% of the funding amount requested in our proposal. We are requesting the PPS Board of Education increase the CBO's student investment account allocation to a minimum of 75% of the original amount in our proposal. This would equal approximately $1.6 million compared to the district's current proposed allocation of $940,000. This would be an important step in demonstrating full district support of the PPS students served by the CBOs. CBOs serve students that have historically experienced academic disparities. We serve the highest percentages of special education students in the district. We serve high concentrations of students of color, emerging bilingual students, and students navigating poverty, homelessness, and foster care. This is the population that architects of the Student Success Act, as well as district leaders, have stated need to be supported through the student investment account. The CBOs understand and appreciate the tremendous amount of time and effort you all invest in creating equitable opportunities and outcomes for all students. And we recognize the tough decisions you must make in allocating funding across a large district. We want to leave you with a visual aid before you begin deliberating on the district's student investment account application. We're giving each of you, and I'll pass this out in a bit, we're giving each of you photos of 8 students that recently graduated from a CBO after previously dropping out or almost dropping out. While these particular students are from one CBO, they represent the students spread across the entire CBO network of schools. Please refer to these students and their stories as you consider resourcing the CBOs at a minimum of 75% of our proposal, not the 40% currently designated in the district's application. It will help these neglected students and schools with the opportunity they deserve. Thank you. And I'll pass it out right now. Sorry, I'm about one table.
All right.
Okay, perfect. So good evening, Chair Constan, Vice Chair Moore, and Superintendent Guerrero, and members of the PPS Board. For the record, my name is Ilona Wilson, and I'm an organizer with Stand for Children, here to speak on the Student Investment Account proposal. Before becoming an organizer, I attended schools in PPS, graduated from Franklin High School in 2014. I then worked within PPS Communications Office, or SIPA, for a couple of summers while I was in college doing outreach. I'm a first-generation college graduate, and I am dedicated to ensuring that our students receive the quality education that they deserve so that we can bring our graduation rate up to 100%, because I know that we can. At STAND, we helped shape and advocate for the Student Success Act, specifically the Student Investment Account, and we want to applaud PPS working to fulfill the intent and spirit of the law by 1, centering the work on equity, 2, working to meet students' mental and behavioral health needs, and 3, focusing investments on increasing academic achievement for students, including reducing academic disparities for students navigating poverty, students of color, students with disabilities, students who are emerging bilingual, students who are in foster care, students who are experiencing homelessness, and any other groups of students who have historically experienced academic disparities. It is an honor to partner with PPS on engaging members of the community in this process. A lot of work went into this process, and there's still a lot of work to do in order to ensure that the district serves our students equitably across the region. After reviewing the proposal, there are several core investment areas that I want to highlight. It's important to note that these investments reflect feedback from members of the community. After reviewing, more funding for culturally specific organizations and services, expansion of mental and behavioral health supports, increasing staffing for students with disabilities, boost in supports for early transition, and additional resources to support the implementation of ethnic studies, tribal history, shared history, early literacy, and language development. Again, these investments reflect feedback from members of the community, and when resourced equitably and implemented well, these investments can be game changers for so many of our students who, if given these targeted resources and supports, can and will succeed. We appreciate the opportunity to partner with PPS and look forward to ensuring the proposal continues to embed and center equity and reflect and incorporate input from the community members, especially communities that have historically been underrepresented and underserved. Overall, this process is heading in the right direction. There are a few areas where we need some information and clarity. We will follow up with some additional questions and feedback we've gathered from partners and community members. This is our opportunity to help change the odds for so many students across our district. And I want to thank you again for your time today, and I look forward to collaborating with you more in this work.
Thank you. And thanks to Stand on the front end for helping us with the community engagement process that informed this work. One more person signed up for public testimony, Maria Rangel, right here. Back. The short chairs.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time of listening. I'm here to speak about the Student Investment Account, and I'm here on behalf of PPS parents I help support. My name is Maria Rangel, and I'm the Bilingual Outreach Coordinator for ABI. I work under the Breaking Barriers grant that is federally funded. Under this grant, my role is to break barriers for underserved families and their children with disabilities. It also includes our social justice youth program. Our organization is also Oregon's Community Parent Resource Center. The role of the Community Parent Resource Center is to work with families and youth with disabilities and specifically work to help parents participate effectively in their child's education and to partner to improve all outcomes for children with disabilities. I have been doing advocacy work and supporting parents in their advocacy journey for the past 10 years. I have specifically been supporting Hispanic Latino PPS parents navigating the special education system for about 3 years. I have experienced that most of the parents' starting point in advocacy is the same as mine was years ago when I started the journey of advocacy for my daughter that experiences a disability. I, however, did not have the language barrier, and it was still very hard for me. My advocacy experience included navigating through a very negative delivery of diagnosis, which put me on the path of having low expectations for my daughter due to society and lack of real positive information that I had access to. Overcoming challenges in my community on how people see people with disabilities, challenges in the school system due to not understanding my rights nor my daughter's rights. This all changed for me and my daughter when I got connected and empowered to parent leaders in the disability community. I now had access to information. My mind shifted to having high expectations for my daughter, believing in her abilities, and feeling more empowered to help advocate for her rights. Letting go of what I had been taught by my parents and community, and believing that I am my child's expert and #1 advocate was the hardest thing for me to do, and is one of the hardest things for the parents that I help support to do. I only work 20 hours a week, and that is nearly not enough to help support the need there is within PPS. And not to mention that my 20 hours cover families all across Oregon. Based on the need I have seen within PPS Hispanic Latino parents that have children with disabilities, I would like to ask for your support. I would like to ask for you to see the intersectionality of race and disability, and to partner with our organization that has been doing the work for many years and has the passion, resources, and connections to help parents in our community. A few months ago, there was 2 parents that spoke at the board meeting that I helped support. One of their asks was the hiring of a person who plays the role of educating, supporting the process, navigation, and advocating for families who do not speak English before, during, and after IEP meetings. Another ask that I often get from families is to create a leadership group to be effective disability advocates for their children, and to expand the information to other parents. It would be great if there was a person doing this in PPS half of the time, but it will also be better if there was a person that was working half of the time in PPS and half of the time with an organization like ours, that they can directly provide support our organization, as one of the other barriers I have seen for families that want to reach out is the fear of reaching out to the school system. They often feel less fearful reaching out to a grassroots community organization. We also have a history of successful partnerships with PPS and our All Born In movement and conference that also has Spanish. And the PPS vision, you name people of color and people with disabilities. The community of parents that I help support represent the intersection of both. In the groups you partner with, I don't see a partnership with the skilled intersectional disability organization that is already doing the work. So my ask is that you please consider how better helping support the Latino Hispanic community so they can be effective advocates for their sons and daughters. We all love our sons and daughters, but they need more information and they need more barriers broken. And we have been doing a lot of work, but now it's time for you to step in and help support us in the work that we're already doing. Thank you for your time and have a great rest of your evening. Thank you.
All right, that concludes our public comment. Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to kick us off?
Good evening, everybody. It's nice to see a well-populated work session. Clearly a topic that is capturing everybody's attention, as it should. I'm gonna lead us off. You're gonna hear from several senior staff members, and we're gonna get into some of the details. We'll cover some of the themes in what represents a historic investment in K-12, pre-K-12 here in the state of Oregon. You'll notice we always title our presentations PPS Reimagined because we are working diligently at the business of transforming our school system to better serve every student. The student investment account represents one funding source, albeit a really important one because it's the first time we have a substantial set of new resources in 30 years to actually begin moving the needle in some of the work that we need to do to better serve our students. And so I just want to emphasize that. Tonight we're talking about our student investment account investment package that we're proposing to submit to the Department of Education. We are also simultaneously have commenced our overall general fund budget development, which is the broader budget, which will also speak to and supplement some of the similar areas or areas that might not be listed that we understand need to be a part of the investments that we need to make. It also doesn't count other funding streams. We continue to learn throughout the spring in the district's budget cycle. The budget picture becomes clear. For example, we know there's federal IDEA budget monies that may also be coming to the school district. That also sort of will give us a greater capacity to serve students there. Let's go to the next slide. So a few of the outcomes, I'll start off by sort of trying to paint a little bit of a picture about how we put this all together, how this jigsaws, because we don't want to only look at this in isolation, but we also don't have the complete picture about how they all jigsaw together to get at our board goals and success for our students. But we do recognize that there are some shifts we need to make in our practices, in the way we go about our work. Something that high-performing school systems have as a characteristic is they have a very clear vision, mission, and sort of outcomes that they expect for their students. We spent a year engaged with community to develop Reimagining PPS, which stands as our North Star as a school district. We put our students at the center as the graduate portrait. We're backward mapping what that graduate portrait looks like throughout their pre-K-12 experience, including at the earliest grades. And what usually comes next with the mission is how are we going to operationalize towards that North Star? And so we've also embarked and commenced our multi-year strategic plan. A strategic plan will operationalize our work over the next few years, and then will be followed by another iteration of the strategic plan with the goal of making our vision not just a glossy aspirational document that sits on the shelf, but that we're actually producing evidence that we're making come true. That is what is guiding our work. Our vision talks about not just a graduate portrait, but also the educator essentials. That means the characteristics that any adult that works or touches with our students, characteristics that we believe are important to model for our students, but it also includes a third characteristic. It identifies the system shifts that we need to make as a school system to better serve every student. We know right now that not every student is being served. We rely on our culturally specific organizations. We rely on our community-based programs. All of them play a key and important role, and we recognize that. And we have to work within the finite resources that we have to engage in high leverage strategies and activities, which means sometimes stopping doing the things that we can't quantify have an impact for our students so that we can engage in the activities that will. This represents, in the SIA investment package, an opportunity to really identify those. Does it go as deep as we would want to go in every single area? Probably not. Could we spend time advocating that one area should get a little more than maybe another? We could debate that. But what we've tried to do is produce a bold, well-balanced investment package that touches on the spirit of the legislation while moving the strands of work and our capacity as a school system. So next steps for everyone's information, if you didn't see it already on the posted materials, you'll see tonight's high-level presentation, but more importantly, you will see a lot of the details that we are intending to submit to the Department of Education that includes the full application, which includes a pretty lengthy narrative. I just want to appreciate up front the 4 months of work that went into producing this set of documents by staff engaging the community and really deliberating and debating all of the line items and every one of the activities and how they build on the current capacity that we may have. So, next steps, beyond sort of spending this evening talking about getting a better understanding, is to make sure we're continuing on our roadmap. I talked about our visioning. We've launched our strategic planning. We did that needs assessment. We were out in the community. We spent those months doing that. We submitted our district plan in December before the winter break. We came back. We continued to do more engagement. We captured the synthesis of all of that feedback. You got it in a series of memos. That's part of our artifacts that we are submitting. I can't think of another district that's done as comprehensive or as deep of a job. Can you always do more? Absolutely. And here we are, March, prepared to submit our application. And even as we do that, we know that it'll continue to involve some important community engagement to get down into the details around what it actually means and what that will look like on the ground. I mentioned the system shifts that we're prioritizing this year from the range of system shifts that we believe we need to embark on, and as the senior leadership team, we prioritize these 5 areas. They capture 5 big bodies of work, which have multiple strands within them, that we think are going to be key drivers in the work that we need to do moving forward. So it means making sure our systems and structures are working towards a more racially equitable school system. It means paying attention to our talent and having ways to develop. You'll see in our investment package, much of it is personnel dependent. We are in a state that has a critical shortage of qualified professionals in many of these areas, and so we have to also think long-term about how we create those pathways, those pipelines. We have a massive curriculum debt in Portland Public Schools, not unlike other school districts around the state, where there have not been the resources to make sure we're on a cycle to refresh our students having high quality materials. So this is an area we really want to continue working with our educators to make sure students at a minimum, no matter what building they're in, have those quality resources, and that we're continuing to invest in our educators with those abilities, those strategies to differentiate, particularly for those students who have not experienced success. The Student Success Act, or the SIA in particular, emphasized a few areas such as social, emotional, behavioral, and mental health, which aligns very well with our culture of developing a physical and emotional climate and culture of safety in our school communities. And so you're going to see a number of investment areas where we're putting a focus there. So I'm going to kick it off to the team to continue sort of the overview before we go into our small group discussions.
Great. So it's with this background and this foundation of the sort of goals and aspirations around what the district is trying to achieve, along with the spirit of the legislature in passing the Student Investment Act in partnership with a lot of our statewide and local advocates, that we attempted to think about how do we sort of keep this focus on where we want to transform as a district, while also incorporating the feedback, the feedback and the engagement from our partners, from our teachers, from our staff, from our parents, from our students, so that we're being really strategic. And so while the student investment account represents a fantastic opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, if you will, of an infusion of resources, it really called on us to be strategic. And so we wanted to give people an opportunity to hear a little bit more about some of the strategies in which we approach this prioritization and the application. So like the superintendent said, many of these, you'll see the sort of like string that draws through in terms of our vision, our strategic plan, and what we're hearing in terms of voices from the community into these 3 main sort of strategies. So we wanted to make sure that as a district, as folks who were prioritizing and strategizing, that we had a clear emphasis on racial equity and social justice. Because our theory of change is that when we focus on students of color with an intersectional lens, which means that we, by sort of recognizing the pernicious gaps that students of color experience, while also recognizing the multidimensionality of oppression, and that students of color are often students who are experiencing homelessness, students experiencing poverty, students with disabilities, that we needed to make sure that we were taking into account that intersectional lens, and that if we can sort of really focus in on addressing those barriers that lead to those pernicious gaps, that we would be able to improve the entire system. We would continue to take the targeted universalist approach of having universal goals and targeted strategies, recognizing the multidimensionality of our students, of our families, and our communities, and being targeted in our approaches around that. I think the other thing that we're really called into as a district is, as we think about transformation, as we think about the goals that we want to achieve, we're called to really reach inside and to think about how we build our infrastructure as a district, how we build capacity internally, and that is a longer term strategy. And so we also want to make sure that we're reaching outside of the district, outside of our institution, and thinking how we continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with our partners, that we reach out and that we lean on their capacity, their expertise, their culturally specific work, their relationships with community to really help accelerate the transformation that we want to see. So we have to be able to make sure that we have partnerships, that we're engaging with folks as thought partners, as experts, as being able to sort of build that bridge, so that when we think about the urgent need around talent diversity, around staff and community members with expertise, that we're utilizing that and that we're using that as a strategy to accelerate the transformation to meet the urgent need that we're seeing now. The other thing that we are really called on to is that more is not necessarily more, right? And so with this infusion of resources, we really had to be critical and think about what are the strategies, what are those high leverage opportunities that we can think about how we can do things differently. More of the same to address the pernicious gaps isn't going to make a change, isn't going to address the needs that are emerging and the needs that we've had for a long time. And so we really wanted to, as a leadership team, as community partners, really ask folks, what are those like high leverage strategies? Where has research, where has experience, where has data told us that we are moving the dial and that we can see some acceleration with additional resource? And so that's difficult, right? Because we had to think about where can we find those leverage points and how can we really use this funding as a way to catalyze that change. I think the other thing that we wanted to point out is, and the superintendent alluded to this, about how PPS is really trying to do differently in terms of engagement. We've heard time and time again, our community wants to be part of the process, not only at the front end, but in the making, in the sausage making, and also to be able to hold us accountable to what we say that we want to achieve. So we really followed a process that almost mirrored the student success committee that did town halls, that sort of like took in information, came out with some proposals, and then asked people for feedback. So we started with broad community engagement. We engaged with organizations like you heard from an organization like Stand for Children, the Coalition of Communities of Color, with our school partners, and we had really great input. We had really well-attended sessions. We also worked with focal students. We wanted to make sure that we were asking students directly and really trying to live and lean into our aspirations around student voice. We also recognize the importance of our educators, of the expertise and the talent that we have in-house, and wanted to make sure that everyone had an opportunity to give feedback so that they can be part of the problem solving and the strategy making that we wanted to do. We also continue to really lead into the focal groups that the legislature asked us to. So we had focus groups with migrant education, with students and families experiencing homelessness, our Head Start families, and with our immigrant and refugee families with the partnership with Unite Oregon. I think one of the things that the superintendent alluded to about how we were doing things differently is that we have a set of really strong community partners who are culturally specific that serve thousands of our students and families each year, and we asked them to be thought partners with us in late October to take some of the findings that you were getting to help us think about how we might reimagine some of the work that they're doing with us and how we can do that differently and more effectively. And so that thought partnership, that broad engagement, that focused engagement, we're really trying to, as a district, do things differently, really sort of lean into that partnership and collaboration with diversity of stakeholder groups and diversity of partners, because we think that that's what's ultimately going to make us stronger as a district and help us build that overall capacity. So hopefully you'll hear and you'll experience that this engagement was not just a check the box activity, but really something that we want to sort of like incorporate, be part of the fabric of what we're doing at PPS. Turn it over to Craig.
I'm going to go ahead and stand up. I like to move around for those of you that know me. So the heart of today's work session and activity is really going to be around a lot of the work that we're going to be doing at our individual groups. Claire and I are going to get through the rest of this presentation so we can make sure that we are on time, and we're afforded the time that's dedicated to each of our teams moving forward. So this is some of the exciting work that some of our partners that were speaking at public comment earlier alluded to. What's really exciting about our key investments is that the majority of these investments are purely in the schools. You know, these investments are something that principals and leaders and teachers and kids can absolutely feel, and being able to actually see some of the impacts of what these investments are aimed to do. Right here, we're looking at increased academic supports and target interventions for our most vulnerable students. This ranges from adding additional teachers and instructional specialists at our targeted schools, which are CSI or TSI in our title schools, which is 30+ schools here in PPS. An expansion of early ed access, additional special education classrooms and services, which we know has been called out specifically in the SSA. Culturally specific curriculum supports to accurately present to all students in contributions of Native Americans past and present. And we know that that's something also that was specifically called out that we are making an investment in. Increasing social, emotional, mental, and behavioral health supports across the district, improving our counselor to student ratios at all of our middle schools, our K-8s, and our and then also looking at increasing the number of social workers that we're adding in our system. Every single high school getting a 1.0 social worker, our comprehensive high schools. Looking at social workers, then going across the entire system and servicing our K-5s, our K-8s, and our middles. Looking at all of our middle schools, also receiving an additional counselor with the counselor ratio being dropped to a 1 to 250 ratio. We're looking at additional school psychologists. We're contracting with culture-specific organizations, which we heard earlier, which was specifically called out in the SSA package. And then additional staff in our restorative justice and Title IX teams through the Office of Student Support Services, again, which is a huge investment, which is a direct response to some of the needs in our systems that our students have been grappling with. So we're really excited about that. Optimal student-teacher ratios and class sizes across actually a lot of our grade levels. We're looking at lowering the class sizes, actually K-12. We're really actually seeing some very historic class size shifts, especially in our kinder and our first grade. We're looking at classroom size shifts significantly in our middle schools, and then also addressing some of those shifts at the high school level. We're really excited about that. Also, additional instructional specialists to support teachers and students in CSI and TSI schools. We know that that's where our historically underserved students, the majority of our students are in our CSI, TSI schools. And one of our concentrated efforts that we heard from our superintendent is that we have not had a robust curriculum for a very long time here in PPS. But as we are rolling out our guaranteed and viable curriculum, we also have to be able to make sure that we're equipping our schools with instructional specialists that can help coach and guide our teachers through the rollout of this. But also, more importantly, our instructional specialists are also going to be working with also small student groups to make sure that our students are actually meeting the standard, meeting the need, and are consistently growing. So we're really excited about that shift and that add in our CSI and TSI schools. The expansion of elective courses in comprehensive middles and K-8s. One of the things that specifically the SSA called out was how we are making sure that we're providing equitable programming and opportunities and access for all of our students. We know that there have been gaps and disparities across our K-8s and middles in terms of offerings, in terms of elective offerings and what students have access to. This is a significant investment in terms of how we are making a concerted effort at adding additional electives and additional course offerings for all of our students at our K-8s and middles. This is huge. One of the things that we're also looking at doing through this is continuing to expand on our arts pathways and ensuring that we actually have very clear feeder programs where students have multiple pathways that have access to a variety of different offerings specific in the arts. Technology support to implement one-to-one device programs in 5 of our new Verizon Innovative Schools, and I'm really excited about that. And we have our CTO here. Don would be more than happy to talk about this exciting opportunity that we have for our students regarding our one-to-one initiative. More equitable access to arts education, especially in our historically underserved school communities. We talked a little bit about that, but this is specifically increasing art staffing in support of elementary and middle levels in the Jefferson, Madison, and Roosevelt clusters. This is again very huge as we are looking at expanding those feeder offerings and making sure that we have consistent pathways in our feeder programs. Additional visual and performing arts teachers on special assignment positions to support the Master Arts Ed plan. We know that Kristen Brayson and her team have done phenomenal work in our visual arts and performing arts department. We are adding additional TOSAs to make sure that they're coming on to support the expansion of our arts programming in our district. And then of course, another significant investment is the purchasing of new instruments and materials for our visual arts and performing programs. And this is our investment in our culturally specific student and family supports and expanded community partnerships. We're really, really excited. We have Danny Ledesma here with us today, who is our Senior Advisor on Racial Equity and Social Justice, who would be more than happy to speak to any of these specifically, but to touch on it, which is really, really exciting. We heard from some of our partners earlier in public comment, an investment in expanding our culturally specific student and family engagement resources, making available additional high school wraparound services, increasing our extended learning opportunities in our system, providing more opportunities for mentorship and student leadership, and expanding culturally specific enrichment activities. I know that seems like it's a lot, but Danny and the team have a robust wraparound plan for how this is going to touch our students, specifically our historically underserved schools, in a way that's going to be very meaningful and impactful, and it's going to help us drive student achievement. And then we have an investment, oh actually this is okay. No, go ahead Claire, I don't want to take your spot. So we'll turn it over to our Deputy Superintendent of Business and Ops.
So on our last page of investments is really about curriculum materials that we're looking for English language development for our English language learners, and as well as new curriculum and professional development and materials for especially in our health and PE areas. One thing that I wanted to clarify, because I've received the question multiple times today, in your packets you have the long list of where you'll see Tier 1 and Tier 2. So Tier 1 is what we're putting forward and balances to the allocation from the state. Tier 2 is things that when we looked at all the things we wanted to do, they didn't make it in the first pass. Now, when we submit this plan to the state, we get it approved. We, in the meantime, we're beginning to hire those positions. It is possible we may not be able to fill all the positions we want to hire because the whole state is hiring right now, right? So the Tier 2 will also be our backup plan for year 1. So if there's areas that we can't find enough candidates or high quality candidates, then we'll go ahead and go to Tier 2 to round out our request. We're going to make sure that we spend every dollar of the SIA investment. There was no question that we're going to leave anything on the table. Okay, with that, we're going to go to table discussions with our board and Community Budget Review Committee members. And we have some student reps here today as part of the CDRC, and glad to see them join. Now we're running a little bit late, so I'm going to ask that our report out go down to 20 minutes in the end, so that means 5 minutes per table. So we'll give you a half an hour to discuss the school investment account materials. You have the full application that's been given to you, and we have 2 guiding questions. Where do you see planned activities and investments most closely connected to what we've heard through our needs assessment from our community? And if you were to present this to your constituencies tomorrow, what are the key takeaways you will share? So those are what we're asking you to look at as you're going through and discussing the materials. Each table has a facilitator and a note taker. Note takers, you can create a Google Doc and then just share it with both Gail Warren and myself.
Who's our facilitator?
Hi, I just remembered that was
You got this. You got this. Does everybody know? I know, right? I just usually be in the room. Are you a parent? We're allowed to talk. I don't know.
we were talking.
This is kind of mean. I stayed up this late.
She's holding.
That's not, she's got organized, she's got trainers, but she's
I'm Donald, I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the district.
So Amy Constant, PPS parent and board.
So our hope is that after this person indicated that there's greater clarity on the work that we've been doing, and so this PowerPoint really reflects a lot of, so it's sort of like the roadmap that EPS is taking. That's what we have. And so there are some guiding questions that we're going to be looking at.
So there's something being on the table.
I just barely caught that. Where's you can be Craig and you have all the answers.
So the protocol is for a conversation to take place in this small group, and then be able to, after the conversation, to generate responses to these that will be recorded. Okay. But in addition to that, your conversation and your responses will be helpful to us, will be helpful to take back.
Yes, yeah, there's names on the
What
table.
is this
They're not my names.
resonated most with you, and where can we begin to add and address more?
Challenge, by the way. It's a pleasure to meet you, really is.
Here, if you want to be data informed, I don't know if everybody has this, but this was in our packet, so this is an analysis of feedback from the community sessions, and we also have analysis of feedback from the staff listening sessions. So if we're to be responding to what we heard through the needs assessment, this is what we heard through the needs assessment. But I would also say that the assessment are historical prize for unfunded and underfunded activities. Not,
So as you heard the presentation, what resonated with you? Let's start there. Let me address.
Who the custodians?
So my technical question is, money around racial equity is an organization that they want to apply for funds through that process. Are they sometimes we silo bed, race, so they get this process.
I was going to say that. I guess I've watched that process some of the best. Yeah, I see that.
is there a link to
Correct.
that rolled out in schools? Like how it's rolling out? Just what exactly those funds be spent on and what will it be like for a student struggling today?
So for a given student, that will look like access or increased access to school.
At every school, down we can find them to hire.
Alternative ways to
So this is a great question.
Just that one.
What is a good question?
No, but I think what as this great challenge is very realistic, right? Because we've spent, even as chief academic officer, my charge was to do the academic performance. Really, and I was saying, when you have to pay attention to the life of the student and how he or she is reacting at the pace to the environment. And you have to realize you have to begin to bring that back to the letter of the law, the academic, because there's great connections, great relevance actually in their intersection.
An epiphany I had, what ODE says makes it sound very modeling it to the rest of you.
You might. That's accurate.
About the principal is fairly new to pencil and betting chaos. Stuff's been working on it and put some really good systems in place, really good structures. And it hasn't begun to really see an impact on the students' achievement yet, even though by all accounts they do the right things, they have the resources and all that. And she said, you know, to be honest, but it's as we can put all of that culture and well-being first. If you can do it, and but that has to be a foundation. That's not taken care of. We're kind of but then we have it. So we've been very scattershot with
if you look at the actual investment, you see online.
Yeah, I saw
The CBO made a proposal, the CBO's made a proposal to the school board, asking for a certain amount of money, and we got that proposal, staff looked at it, and decided to fund it, so it's 40% seriously per line item, but we're going to invest in adding equity dollars, so it's partly, getting this was part of the board.
Actually, I think it's so a year next year, that's a technical commercial or dependent on Lombard, and then how
It will be low.
and so all of the Clinton schools, because there's 6 to 12.
So I think kids that what I feel like right now is that she knows like affecting engagement together. So we don't have, there are lots of stuff, none of the options are perfect. But I feel like there's been a huge investment in I think
All of those, when it starts at school level too, so
6 to 12. So I have a couple that start in the
my kid went to very different experience.
middle school kids. Heavy music.
I feel like this is like this is kind of hit everything in a way where we're like, we're not making it, but then like nothing.
Well, it's like that's they don't know. They said this is a diplomatic way to respond.
Really south, and I think everybody, I think there's,
Cool.
but I think yours in this what we're trying to, even though that's a. So that would be my constituency.
That might be
Early learning.
Oh, thank you. Sharing, that's awesome.
Every year.
I take mine now.
You don't know where to go.
One of the questions I have.
I'm sorry.
Get list out. So almost 40%. Oh yeah. Outside coordination services.
And I would say that mine is 51. I know why that is, but I just want to yes, I don't know if
Class sizes I like all of them. I'm not sure, with the exception of are there alternatives that we're
I'm wondering if you sorted these by amount, whether there would be weighted in a similar way. For example, the various chambers of
Not necessarily cohort.
You know me, sure.
one Wednesday evening, where do we see the other clock? Sure. You're going to get at that.
and then we've added.
That probably would say
I think also you could argue that with both the staff feedback and the staff feedback, that then the driver for the need for social emotional support is that these kids aren't ready to work, they're not able to work. So it really is about how achievement institute, aside from
so, if you color-coded these,
That would be, with a little bit of time, and these are all designed. Getting the second question, sorry, if I were talking, I mean, obviously, responded to with what you're hearing.
It seems like all things that would be, you know,
Can I ask you a quick question? You know, we talk about the class sizes. Class sizes resonate really well. There's not a lot of evidence that it. I think that's such an interesting distance, right? Nothing gets it. 28 kids in the
But I'm also happy to see you, Terry. I haven't seen you for a while.
so there's a point at which it becomes great. You don't want 40 in a fifth grade class. We're making sure that we said, you know, regardless of we want to do one-on-one. If there was a classroom space, we had to put more staff. So most of the class sizes and then that's the we're spreading it out. It's not really
well, you get two flexibilities, right? So the class size is by adding the elective.
It's sort of a hot spot. Are you doing why we're not going to see the average? So
it's a hot spot.
that's what we're here. We don't But what is interesting, some of these, especially with the SEO work, is a lot of that work is focused on relationships and how we interact with students. So that is a lot of so that will draw that down. Social emotional, which allows for success. So it's not huge classes. There are more adults that students that are building as opposed to pushing them along.
Things like definitional workshop classes came up, counseling came up a lot, sports came up. The only reason this kids going to school is
That's the hard part too, is like bringing it back to you.
It's definitely a competency to try to focus on. The high school touch
And that athletics is what the arts are because our data are what they are. The sense of I want to go to school because I get to participate in something else. So they have become traditional. The industrial arts have also been expanded beyond just the 9-12 program into the middle school.
whether it's by culture-specific.
And not only because we internally have read our partners,
Brenda and I were doing this community.
UCC as well, because they see the value, exposing students to the real world, seeing the value. So we're usually doing a lot of
I just want to really emphasize that it doesn't matter every single one of our organizations.
So as we now build on that, we organize it around 3 areas: high school, middle school redesign, and our K through. And we're creating a through line that allows us to benchmark our progress over time to make sure that we are actually meeting the graduate portrait. The graduate portrait doesn't begin in high school, it begins with a 3 to 5-year-old. So when we take that far back, what is the experience like for students not only at the middle school, at the elementary level, and
describe
so those are the things that we're going to build on. In that will be, what is the life of the student going to be like? How's it going to be different? So one of the things that we did was spend time visiting schools that have done school redesign. not just because of the middle school redesign, but because of the mindset that has been created as a result of that. Right?
TSI, those are middle tier, and then we have, a title where everyone else is captured in that tier.
So two things stand
You're right, good feedback.
Yeah, so two things stand out: relevance and authenticity. How are we being authentic in what we are providing to the students? So that there's not
We also show a visual, so community can
and so when we look at our curriculum, we've had to go back and see how is it going to be the same, but how is it going to be different? When we talk about innovation and improvement, what are we talking about? So we are engaging in design thinking, which comes out of the D School Stanford. And so we've been spending time in our own learning, so we're front-loading the learning to begin to think differently about how we're going to, when Kellogg opens, is it going to open up the same, or are we going to take the opportunity to open it differently? With students at the center having spoken to us to say, this was my middle school, so when Parker talks about his middle school experience, how do we influence learning? Let's think about how we can open up help as a middle school, right? Those kids are coming up, the third graders. What do they aspire to accomplish in the middle school? So part of what we're going to do, not only for the middle school, but as we think about that K-12 continuum, is to be centered more around the life of the students in our system, which hasn't happened.
When I think about my kids' middle school experience, they were at a big middle school that is often held up as a paragon because it has relatively a big selection of electives, and we have this slightly false narrative, slightly realistic. That's the great inequity of our system. The fact is, the electives of the system were all chosen by the skill set and interest of the adults. It has nothing to do with the curriculum or the students' interest. And, to have 8 of those things as opposed to 1 to say, what does it really matter? Yeah, and just on top of it, and not as loud.
That money then will be used, once we've been more thoughtful about what we want to create, to consider what are the instructional programs that we're going to implement that this money should be. Like what are the practices that we're going to prepare our teachers on and how is this fund this? It's exciting to get this money, but it's also scary because there's a huge responsibility because it's a lot of money, right? There's a big responsibility attached to doing right by the Parkers, right? And so making sure that we do is where I guess these conversations help because it's causes a very constant reflection about what we're doing.
I mean, that's a live conversation right now. What is it, 4%?
Legislation says indirect legislation needs 4 maximum 500,000.
Which if you're a bigger business, you're gonna have a 500 report out.
We're doing because otherwise, we're going to send out a bunch of What is that?
Give us a little more. We're talking about our. We're now talking about caregivers and also aging parents.
there's the other piece is there's not a lot of operational support, not just administrative support, but we're talking 80 to 100 teachers. We didn't go where's the desk, where's the laptop, so there's other pieces that we have to do. Because this is so
Just a question about, yeah, we got some like, sort of like, we
well, we haven't even got the question too, I'm just being able to take about what are you going to tell your constituents? I believe that
Roger and I are being bad over here because we were on CBRC together, so we're just catching up on where we're at.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna go to bed. All right. Let's hang out.
I like Ryan Miller.
I have it on video, but I get out of
I was in PPS. I've worked in the building for 8 years. I was constantly frustrated
Okay, see you. Bye, man. Bye.
I was in facility, just getting my right to support. So somehow that money, somehow twist that, spin that, and help it realize that is important. Not just, you don't want to just diminish your administrative staff. I'm not sure how you do that.
I think it's part of our we need to be really specific. When I say explicit, maybe not publicly specific.
Pull all this off.
It'd be really effective. Right.
Yeah.
I've told everyone, I mean, asking for that board, but it's, you know, I get so many jokes, right? Because when it comes down to a teacher that's a administrator, then all year long, they can tell you about board, phone calls, and so, oh, you mean all the admin?
Why would you just do it?
And 500,000. Yeah.
Those are the like, I don't like
And I would actually say,
my husband, he was 30 years, he was 30.
Oh, yeah, I think there is a limit we used to.
And actually, neither was Anthony,
Because you were here before.
no, you're close to your mic.
Pushing in. That's part of it. So make sure that you're only hearing from those.
Texted my daughter homework, she texted back, no. And I'm not sure if that was like, so we're, yeah. There is my thing down this place.
Yeah, thank you for appreciating that.
Where I am, and they're going to being, you know, the large.
So the missing piece of
Get back
The
together.
next grade on strategic planning for the next
Well, I'm not pushing.
so
It's
it'll be
okay,
a
but
much
like to
bigger
go
road
forward.
that way. They'll have much more else to do.
And we're gonna start with this table here, because they're ready.
It doesn't fit in.
And we're good. And so we're good. We're hoping that each table is gonna do a 5-minute report out, 5 minutes or less, because we're running long tonight. Okay, so Brenda and Susan's report.
All right. So what we did is, first we.
Hey, listen up.
There you go, Roger.
So what we talked about was the community engagement pieces. Our group really thought that the community feedback and the sessions were inclusive of the plan. The one comment was in regards to students with disabilities. They didn't necessarily see like all born in or something like that identified in the groups that we collected information from. So that was one comment. The two students that were here that still had remarks for the they both said that it looked like we listened to the community. They really liked the plan. They liked how our CBOs are included. Maxine specifically said she really liked how it feels like this has touched every school. And that's another conversation that we had, is that every school, every program, including our CBOs, is affected in a positive way by the SIA. And was there anything else in number one question? I don't think so. It's good job. What would people take away from it is to talk about that we really focused on social emotional, mental and behavioral health, that we focused on making sure that we had supports in every school, and inclusive of racial equity, making sure that our culturally specific organizations were involved and partnering with us, and to vote for the bond.
Is that kind of a non sequitur there? Just a little plug when you had the floor?
Yes, yes. I mean, well, it was Director Lowry's plug.
Yeah.
That was her elevator speech.
If I had to do my look, and I would say that we're looking at middle school, I'm working on that,
Oh, yeah,
and then
middle school.
arts. And then of course we still need more resources. While this is an amazing investment, doesn't meet all the needs we have. So vote for the bond in 2020 would be the end of the speech.
Yes, that was the end of her speech.
So, and then we have the general fund, the social grant fund, and we're going to have the Lowry Middle School marching band fund.
Yes.
As part of this.
I'm writing this down.
Don't forget
the past dance fund.
So did we miss anything?
Communication piece. We need to do a better communication.
Yes, yeah, and so Roger just talked about making sure that we're communicating this information out better. We specifically talked about hiring and all of the work that goes into recruiting and hiring, specifically staff of color, and what goes into that, and the communication, that more global communication just about the work that we are doing, making sure that we're communicating that out so that our community knows what we're doing. Did I summarize that?
So, just want to say, staff spent a ton of outside the 40-hour work week working on this, and specifically, we're on, after being for decades chronically late in our hiring schedule, we're going to be chronically early, and that's again a ton of work by staff, particularly in HR. So I just want to call that out and say thank you.
All right, how about this table? Are we ready over here? Okay?
Sure. I just want to make sure I capture everything, so if I miss something, please speak up. So we kind of started looking at both of the needs assessments from the community and the staff and where they aligned. And I think notably it was around social emotional learning. So we discussed what that looks like for a student and a teacher across the district, how these specific budget items will actually play out. in terms of support. So how does class size reduction kind of support social emotional learning development for kids in schools? We also talked about this kind of issue or challenge around overhead and operating costs and maybe being capped within the legislation itself. So if we're trying to effectively get these budget pieces in play with less, not less, but not enough capacity at the district, it's not going to be as efficacious on the ground. And how can we be kind of advocating for that or talking about what that might look like moving forward? We also talked about just overall how these investments kind of lay the groundwork for future planning across the district. So we shared that, you know, in terms of the high school success work, the middle school redesign work, early literacy and early learning initiatives, how does this kind of tie into that forward momentum across the district? And then finally, we talked about how this really aligns with the district's overall vision and strategic plan. And that being that kind of critical piece that, you know, Superintendent Carrera shared. In the beginning, of course, there was a wish list that was enormous, you know, and then kind of making that decision, if it doesn't tie into our overall vision and North Star, then it really isn't suited for the investment.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. How about down here? And Janet?
We had a lot of what the other two tables had in terms of alignment with social emotional support. We had a lot of questions though around staffing. I think that table just said that. And then also like our investments around the GBC. And so like how does this translate into better instructional practices at Tier 1? And then finally, our last question was evaluation. And so how are we going to evaluate the impact of these investments? What does it look like and how often? So when are we going to first determine if they're working the way we intend them to work?
Okay, how about this table? I know we come out for conversation.
Some similar things to what everybody else has said, especially what Keely just said, around the benchmarks, how are we going to measure success in all of this? And one of the things that was positive was the investment in racial equity and social justice. There was a question around the category of staffing and how we're going to be able to accomplish that. And there's really only one kind of line for that objective, and it was.
Well, it was on strategy, it was on system shift C, and there was only one strategy listed underneath that had to do more with the HR function, hiring someone that could do the retaining, or the hiring and retention. I'm looking for it here. So it was more optimal student-teacher ratios and class sizes across many grade levels. And the activity to get us there was FTE for human resources, including 2 FTE for recruiters and 1 FTE for class and compensation analyst, with additional admin to be determined at about $500,000 a year over 3 years.
So that is.
And the question was, how does that translate to, you know, more diverse staff and the system shifts that we've outlined.
Sure. So one of the things is with the Student Investment Act, there is an indirect cost that we're allowed to use up to 500,000. So
That's what I was wondering.
And that's how we're spending it, is by supporting. If you can imagine, this is hiring hundreds of staff.
Yes.
And it's adding a whole other layer of work, but it does also align with our work in terms of what we're looking for, you know, having our staff demographics and our student demographics mirror each other. That's a long-term
Can I just jump in? Just before you leave that point, because that's one of the things that we were trying to make. I didn't realize this. The state legislation caps the administrative cost for a district like PPS at $500,000, which is absurd. And in fact, we'll make the program ineffective. So I think as we go into a budget conversation, we need to talk about how to redirect some other resources, since the state has restricted our ability to use these new resources to effectively implement the program. Where do we get those resources elsewhere in the budget to make it effective? So that was one of the points that
Do you like off the top of your head, math-wise, know what the percentage is?
Well, it's 211 employees that
I'm
we're
just saying
Do you
the
mean the
500,000
500,000?
divided by.
So the admin indirect is typically like a 4% number. The
Okay.
legislation said or 500,000 maximum. So
Okay.
any bigger district is very quickly, so you don't notice anywhere on this list a bunch of new central office administrators. What we decided to invest those $500,000 limitation on is 2 HR recruiters, so we can even find all those licensed professionals.
Right,
it's
right.
about 1.5% roughly.
It's one, okay, because the housing bond is a lot higher percentage-wise.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Did
Well-
we get everything covered?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, one thing that was kind of tied into that, as we started going through things with the list of system shifts, so the A, B, C, D, E, and then the sub-things, which I think is well broken out, tied to the roadmap that we like discussed earlier. There ended up being a lot of those things that were not really addressed at all in the particular spending priorities, or very minimally, and this doesn't really kind of call out why we chose what we did and where we're specifically choosing to not invest right now, even though we called them out as priorities here at the top.
So understanding that this is our application to the state,
Yep.
coming forward in April, you'll have a proposed budget and the strategic, the rollout of our strategic plan, and we're still connecting those dots.
Totally. But the second question was like, when are you gonna go back to your constituency with? I'd be like, we're choosing to not do some things here, and I don't know exactly.
So that was the second
Yeah.
question that you gave us.
So what, our thinking around our priorities.
Probably to how to describe, if you do these investments, what your outcome you're gonna get. How do you,
What's our expected?
And that is definitely, Dr. Russ Brown is not here this evening, but he is doing that exact work of aligning our, this work with our board outcomes and looking at what metrics for academic return on investment we wanna, track and work with as we're rolling out this plan going forward. So we're gonna start out with some smaller pieces and then eventually get to where we're doing it for most of our pieces. But this is gonna be our first year of doing it, so we're dividing out chunks of it. Okay, but more to come.
but these are 3-year.
This is a 3-year plan, so we have to submit an updated plan next year. So this doesn't mean that everything, as you can imagine, when the whole state is hiring, our initial plan and what we roll forward by the time school starts will probably be modified. I can guarantee you it will be modified. So what will come back to the board, once we get the approval from this application, then it goes to ODE, and then we go through a whole process with them and get their approval, and then that comes back, the approved document comes and gets accepted by the board the second time. Then, when we get to July and August, remembering we're gonna spend every dime, when we can't hire enough social workers, because everyone in the county wants social workers, we're gonna decide what is our tier 2 investment that we're using in order to spend those dollars by the time we actually get till September 30th the first year, but in future years, we'll have June 30th as a deadline. So we always have to have that tier 2 available. Some of that is into a future year, but some of it is also, if this, we're gonna spend every dollar, so here's our tier 2 as we need to go down to the next level.
Just to clarify, by tier 2, we mean plan B.
Right. Not interventions. So I just want to make sure, I'll answer in just a second. So, I want to make sure you guys are done. And then, at this point, we're not really opening it up to a public comment, but I'd be happy to take
Said
a
questions
question.
and answers at the end. On the
So, and I
agenda.
think it's because it's running so late, but I'd be happy to take a question.
So, it's not even a question, it's a statement. So, I'm very concerned that I'm looking at this plan and I was listening at this group, and not once did I hear African American social workers. I was at 3 meetings. It was very clear that the people at the Fabian meeting and at the Roosevelt meeting and at the meeting at Harriet Tubman said that the social workers should look like the dominant minority group. I didn't hear that. And one of the things that concerns me, if we are not intentional about what we're going to do, it could possibly not be done. It wasn't in there. I saw that we had social workers. We also were very clear at those meetings that we wanted more teachers of color. I saw more teachers, but I didn't see teachers of color. I did hear this group call it out, but I'm saying we have to be intentional. We have to see this in writing, because it's real easy to say, we did everything on that piece of paper, but we didn't spell it out.
It is in
And
here.
so I'm just saying, I didn't hear it. You did a presentation up there, and I didn't see it. And when he asked, what did you notice about this? Nobody in this group said that. I just want to make sure it's on the record that that's what I heard at 3 meetings.
Yeah.
And we've got to be intentional. We've got to be intentional about working with our African American kids. That's what the Student Success Act said. Our Latino kids, that's what the Student Success Act said. Our students who are, I heard special needs a lot, social emotional, but that's a lot of kids that are not special ed. So we have to be very intentional and very clear, because that's what you asked for, community input. I heard it. I heard the community input. I was there. And I want to hear it every time we talk about how we're going to spend Student Success Act money. So.
Appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, at this point, it's the witching hour, so I'm going to call it a night, and thank you all for coming. Thank you, community, for being here and being a part of the process.
One more